I got another video for y'all today, and it's the top 10 Armament Haki users. Of course, these people were in the top 10 use advanced Armament Haki. That's Rio emittance. They can hit you before like even hitting you. It's like their aura is hitting you. And you still, take damage and, you feel the impact. So, and there's going to be some people on here that you might not have thought. And it's because we've seen it in the anime, right? The people that I'm saying use Armament Haki, not like people say they have Armament Haki, but they don't use it or it's not seen enough. So like I have honorable mentions like Whitebeard and Gold Roger. We know they have it, right? But they ain't seen using it. We see them using Conqueror's Haki. We don't see them, black arms and shit like that. We have who else? Virgo, when he was one of the first people post time skip to show feats of Armament Haki. We have, and these are just honorable mentions. This ain't the real ranking right here. We got Mihawk on the list. We have Shanks on the honorable mentions list. Dragon, Scopper, Boss Huguro, and he's actually one that should, in the Nine Scabbards, certain ones who have real emittance. But I just think that the other people on this list just do it better. So at number 10, and Sabo's actually in the honorable mentions list too. I was gonna put him on the list, but then I was like, no. So at number 10 for armament users in One Piece, I got Yamato, the daughter of Kaido. She is good at using her club and using Armament Haki. Rio Advanced Armament Haki. She was using that shit against her own father, to fucking fight against him. She had to put everything out there. And that's what she did. She was using it. She broke out of, some of that shit in the fight with Kaido. And it's a fight against Kaido. She was fighting on the rooftop for a little bit by herself, till Luffy got there. She didn't die. She was standing on that fucking business. But I do think people above her got her beat in the armament department. So I got at number 9, I got Aokiji. Aokiji was an apprentice of Garp. When he came into the Marines, he was like, Garp was like, okay, you want to do what I'm doing, you got to punch that boat. And he's like, well, and you can't use Haki to do that. You're punching it barehanded, And he's like, I can't even use Haki. But then eventually he learns Haki, and eventually he becomes an admiral. He becomes an admiral, like he has a higher rank than Garp eventually. You see that in the flashback when, before Aokiji, or while Aokiji's fighting against Garp in the current timeline, like post-Wano. And he's using Armament Haki against Garp there, punching him in the face, both of them are hitting each other in the face. Boom, boom. Of course, we know who's better out of the two, and expect to see him on the list too. But Aokiji, out of all of his students, is probably the most powerful like armament user out of all of Garp's students that he taught Armament Haki to. Yes, even Kobe, who's also an honorable mention, but he's not on this list. Not yet. He still has a way to go. As Aokiji can use that shit on command, whereas Kobe uses it as like a last move type thing. So at number 8, I have Jinbei. You might be surprised to hear that I have Jinbei on this list, but you shouldn't be surprised. This man's about the fucking hands all the time. We found out that this man knew Armament Haki, not just Armament Haki, but Armament Rio Haki. When he fought against who's who, we saw him break his face. Fishman Jujutsu, Fishman Karate Kempo, you know, Demon Break Fist, hitting him with Rio Emittance and getting him dismissed. You know, just those feats alone, like you've seen him, his body go black, Armament Haki, and then you saw the aura come off of it. That was purple. That's his Rio Emittance. And that's what he did. He packed him up. And Armament Haki is typically done in close quarters, but you'll see on this list, we have swordsmen. And the first one we have on the list is Zoro. Roanoa Zoro from, the Shroud Pirates. He came a long way. We understand that Zoro couldn't cut through steel at first until he fought Mr. One. And even then, he wasn't using Haki, but he was showing, like, his potential to learn Haki. And eventually, he met Mihawk during the time skip. He trained on his island, and he eventually awakened Armament Haki. And then he used it to cut down Pika in Dressrosa. Now it's still basic Armament Haki. He didn't quite learn Rio Emittance until later on. Rio Emittance came during Wano, of course. Rio Emittance, Zoro. And he still even has, work to do with that. As Mihawk is still a opponent that Zoro has to fight. And we know that he probably has Armament Haki as well. And he's probably good at it, but we have not seen the man use it. Remember, Mihawk's blade, it's one of the black blades. Permanently black. We don't know how it got black. We don't know how it got black. People have their theories out there. But we know that Zoro can put Armament Haki into his blades, and he can cut through all kind of shit. He cut through King's durability, to defeat him. He's a fucking tank. And that's because of his lineage factor as being a Venerian. These people were tanks. They were able to take damage and not sustain any injuries. Noticeable injuries. So, number 6, I got Big Mom. Now, she ain't smart, but she does know how to use Armament Haki. She pulled it out against Eustace Kid and Law. Boom. And she's like decking these motherfuckers. She's putting them through, and out of the people that are there, on her opposing side, they're like the key players. They're the ones that Kaido and Big Mom want to get rid of. Kid, Law, Luffy, anybody in the worst generation. And these guys are getting rocked by her. She's using her devil fruit too, that's also fucking them up. But it's like her hands were doing some fucking damage too. And like so much to the point, like that was an extreme diff fight for both Kid and Law. They could have easily lost that fight if they didn't work together right. And she was using, Armament Haki on those guys. At number 5, I got Kozuki Oden at number 5. He was damn good at Armament Haki. A conqueror too, but like we seen him, the two sword style, like he put his arms went black and he was like going the fuck off on that giant boar. He cut that shit in half, and then he, went against Kaido. He went against, tried to go against Whitebeard using shit like that, He's probably one of the best armament users, in my book. I'm telling you, he's at number 5 on my list. So he is like that, with the Armament Haki. Yeah. Zoro is probably closer than you think to him. And he's still growing, and he will surpass Oden one day, but, when it comes to, like, armament, I think Oden has him. And then at number 4, I got Rayleigh. You know, that might be low to some people, but Rayleigh taught Luffy Haki. That's true, he did. But, you know, some people catch on, and when they catch on, if you know what I mean. And they grow at a ridiculous rate. You know, you can say plot armor and other things too, which ain't wrong. But Rayleigh's still at number 4 because he did teach Luffy Armament Haki. And actually, when he was teaching Luffy Armament Haki, he showed proof of admittance, real admittance. That's why he shot that beam of light onto that elephant. It was him projecting his aura out, boom, and hitting the elephant. He also showed real admittance in a flashback when Marco the Phoenix came at him and he stopped him with one finger. Boom. You know, Rayleigh, he's a boss of that Armament Haki. You know, that's all I needed to see, you know, and he was not, you know, sweating that fight or anything. He was just like, he pointed his finger, he was like, he stopped Marco the Phoenix, who was, his Delphi was on full blast, ready to fight. At number 3, I have Kaido. You know, Kaido, he's already a durability tank with his Delph fruit and like his, you know, who he is as just Oni, you know, his race of like being. But then he has Armament Haki on top of that, real admittance. Like he was fucking Luffy up. Luffy is a person who's also like, you know, he ain't the biggest tank. We know that Kaido, you know, is a fucking tank, right? But Luffy is not, you know, some bitch. He can take hits too. We know that Luffy, and I count Luffy in the tank category. I don't give a fuck what anybody else says. He takes blunt force damage, but he was like hitting Luffy so hard and shit that it didn't matter. Like other people hit Luffy and it's like they have to hit him a couple times for him to like feel pain. Kaido's hitting him a few times and he's like, he knocked him out of Gear 4 when he got to Wano. Hit him with Thunder Bagua armaments on that. Luffy was out of Gear 4 and knocked out. You know, he did it again. He knocked him off of Onigashima Armament Haki mitts. But at number 2, I do have Monkey D. Luffy. Because Luffy uses his hands all the fucking time. And he learned real Haki. Well, he already had Haki under his belt because of the regular Armament Haki from, you know, Rayleigh. But then against Katakuri, he found out that he could go harder. You know, he could go even further with it. Because he hit, you know, Katakuri's arms and he was like, God damn, my hands hurt now. You know, how are your hands harder than mine? And then he was like, you know, learning from Boss Hugro in the Udon prison that, yeah, you can go further with this and learn admittance. And then after he learned admittance, he was ready to fight Kaido. And he was doing the most damage to Kaido once he learned admittance. Out of everybody up there on the rooftop. Even, you know, Zoro did his little thing, but, you know, we got Luffy doing more damage than, you know, Zoro ultimately. And you know I'm right, because then Gear 5 comes into play and he's still doing that shit. And ultimately, I do think Luffy will have the best Armament Haki at the end of the series. But right now, that goes to Garp the Fist, you know? It's in the name, like, he fights with his hands and shit. He punches battleships for, like, training. And he keeps his Armament Haki off. You know, he's training his actual body, and then, like, he's applying Haki to his body. And he knows real admittance, and we've seen what his Armament Haki could do, you know. He was fucking shit up on Pirate Island. You know, Aokiji was, you know, taking damage from Garp, an old Garp, not the one that fought on God Valley or fought against Gold Roger or fought against Don Xing Zhao and broke his little drill that was on his head. He did all kinds of shit in his lifetime, to the point he was still like great at using it in his old age. If that has anything to say about the monkey family, they have that beat down energy. They know how to use that Armament Haki well. Once they learn it and hone their skills, that's how I know Luffy's going to be better than Garp with it eventually. No doubt in my mind. And then Dragon might even be better too, or right there with his dad. But he's not in the top 10. So I'll go over the top 10 armament users in One Piece again. Yamato, Aokiji, Jinbei, Zoro, Big Mom, Oden, Silver Rayleigh, Kaido, Monkey D. Luffy, and Monkey D. Garp, number 1. So be cool, call in the corner, and let me know what you think in the comment section.